Hi everybody, good afternoon and welcome back to the Energy Storage Summit. So I'm delighted to welcome the first of our case studies for this afternoon to round off the summit. So the first one will be led by Rene Kerkmeester, who is the CEO at Equigy, which is a really interesting technology-driven platform. But I'll leave Rene to tell you more about it and how it's been transforming behind the meter storage opportunities. So as always, we welcome questions from any of the audience. We will be having a bit of Q&A at the end, and yeah, any questions you do have, please just pop them in the portal or in the Zoom chat and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So now, Rene, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Lucy, for this introduction. I'm happy to speak to you for this energy storage webinar and maybe showing how we believe you can make value out of the energy storage solutions that you have behind the meter. Explain the Equigy concept in this conversation, but maybe a little bit of background. Coming from a TSO, TSOs in Europe being responsible for not only the high voltage grid transport, but also for the system balance. And of course, we have a lot less or more problems with all the renewables, solar and wind, to keep the system at balance. There's much more volatility in the system and unpredictability, and that leads to concern from TSOs how to keep the equilibrium. Because if demand supply is not equal at any given moment in time, then basically we have blackouts, which we do not want to happen. So in the past, the TSOs, they always balance the grid with the big power plants, often fossil plants. And being a digital transformation leader for TenneT, where that's where I came from, we envisioned some 5 years ago that we need to tap into the distributed flexibility sources as additional sources to balance the grid. We also realized that the traditional technologies that we used, lease lines and expensive metering solutions, were not fit for, they were fit for purpose for a couple of hundred of these big power plant devices. But if we want to tap into the millions of devices that are behind the meter, cars, home batteries, but also solar panels or heat pumps, then new technology is needed. So we came up with a blockchain solution, and a platform that I'll explain in a minute. But when we discussed this with big industry, they said, Rene, we love this, but this will only work if this becomes a European standard, a European solution. And that's why we started to engage with other European TSOs. And in December last year, we launched formally, or we incorporated Equigy as a BV, as a Dutch company, to serve Europe initially for its shareholders, which was Terna from Italy, Swissgrid from Switzerland, TenneT from Holland, and TenneT from Germany. But also in the meantime, February 1st, APG from Austria joined the group. So we have now 5 shareholders, and we're active in 5 European markets, with more to come. And maybe we move to the next slide, Lucy, and talk about the mission, vision. So our aim is to unlock distributed flexibilities into the balancing markets. The balancing markets and the congestion management markets across Europe represent a value of over 8 billion euros. And smaller households can today not actively participate in those markets. So Equigy aims to decarbonize these balancing markets, these 8 billion, by unlocking the flexibility from energy storage solutions such as home batteries and cars. Equigy itself is not an aggregator. We have a solution, a technical solution, a data solution that provides the trust, that enables the aggregators to benefit from this opportunity to attack those balancing markets, the value pool of some 8 billion. And that is, I think, the core what you can do with this energy storage behind the meter. You can optimize a household, for instance, but also you can participate in TSO, potential DSO markets, and also in the European wholesale markets. But that's where the value is in. And I'll explain more about the solution, how we enable the aggregators to participate in this market. If we go to the next slide. In the left corner, you see the TSO, and they run for experts different balancing markets like primary, secondary, or tertiary reserves, congestion management. And normally, it's, as I said earlier, the power plants are bidding into these value pool. Through the blockchain, we allow now aggregators, and the aggregator will have their own IoT platform, their own technology stack. They have customer consent for hundreds or thousands of devices. And the aggregator looks at the price setting of the TSO. And if they think they can deliver the service, the flexibility that the TSO needs, they will bid into that market. The TSO will then make a comparison with the other bidders through the merit order. And if the aggregator is cheaper than the traditional solutions, the TSO will tell the aggregator, please activate your pool of devices. The aggregator will do so. He will stop charging, start charging. He will engage his pool and provide the system services to the TSO. At that stage, he would like to have the money, of course, because he delivered the service and the TSO will pay out this money. The key challenge here was, or is for the TSOs, how can we validate, how can we be certain that the service has been delivered by the aggregator? Because if you have a big power plant, as I said earlier, you put an expensive meter, you go there, you see, you check, but how to do this with millions of devices? Now, by engaging the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, in the role of a measurement service provider, we have an interface through the blockchain again, an API, an interface to the OEM. And if, for instance, an aggregator says, I have activated 1,000 BMWs, we can, through the blockchain, check in the BMW cloud if indeed these cars stopped or started to charge. If this is correct, conform the statement of the aggregator, then he's playing fair play and we'll pay him the money, or the TSO will pay him the money. But if we see that the aggregator is just gaming or making it up, of course, then he will be discarded from the system. In some markets, DSOs are also allowed to run new congestion markets. Germany recently adopted new legislation. In the UK, it's already there. I think there will be more European markets to come. And with this solution, the TSOs and DSOs can work together to avoid that a service will be sold twice. It avoids that an aggregator will offer the flexibility both to a DSO and to a TSO, and that when someone needs it, that the service is not available because they have been gaming. So the whole idea of this blockchain platform is to provide the technology interface, the data layer between all the actors that are relevant for making this happen, for decarbonizing the flexibility markets. Equigy as such is not for profit. You could really see this as an extended system service of the TSO, because in a way the TSOs are discriminating today. Today, the only ones that can participate in this 8 billion value are the large power plants and not the aggregators with the pools of devices. And by launching this initiative, we unlock this 8 billion value for aggregators in those TSO and DSO markets. We've selected a private blockchain. Public blockchain, as you may know, it consumes a lot of energy, and that would defeat the objective of the decarbonization. But private blockchain is set up the same principles, but uses trusted parties. That means if an aggregator signs up through Equigy, then we know who he is, and that makes the whole validation mechanisms that you have in public blockchain much easier and less energy consuming. So we take the maximum benefits of the latest blockchain technology without the disadvantages of the public blockchain solution out there. So all in all, we believe there's sufficient flexibilities in the markets by 2030 to run the entire 8 billion balancing markets by these distributed flexibility sources. So our ambition as TS is to support the TSOs in decarbonizing the balancing act and to make these big power plants obsolete and to replace them by behind the meter smaller storage solutions. If we go to the next slide, Lucy. The way we set this up, by working together with those TSOs, should be 5 from now, but as an example, they run their national instances because the balancing markets are slightly different in each market, but there's a lot of similarities as well. So, for instance, Terna in Italy will run this solution, tailor-made for their own market, but a lot of the development that we have done can be reused for other markets. And that way we share, on one hand, the cost for innovation. We learn from each other across Europe, but most importantly, we set a standard. That means if, for instance, you'll see later the name of BMW, who became a partner for us, if we set up the project in Germany, and if it's all done, the interfacing to the APIs to Equigy are standard, and they can also be used in Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Switzerland. And that provides a standard for Europe. And that's why we like to speed up this whole process by doing this in every marketplace. Maybe we go to the next slide. So I think that the essence of the solution is driving the ecosystem. When we talk to the big car manufacturers, for instance, they told us that thousands or hundreds of projects in all the countries with DSOs were just, especially pre-COVID, becoming too expensive to play with. They were looking for a solution to scale, and that's exactly what we're offering them. So here you see depicted just some of the brands that have committed to projects and engagements with us. If you look on the website, www.equigy.com, you see the whole case study explained. You also see, of course, the concept further explained. But there's also a long list of partners that are preparing their projects, that do result marketing, and they will only make the announcements after the project has been completed. So as said, we work now in 5 European countries: Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and APG, Austria, but there's more TSOs to come. So we have a very filled pipeline of additional countries and additional OEMs and aggregators that would like to participate in this mechanism. And that's exactly, if we go to the next slide, how we intend to grow. On one hand, we are working with TSOs of neighboring other European markets to make the solution also available in their market. And we have very positive discussions, and I said a pipeline of other TSOs that want to join. On the other hand, in the markets where we're now active, we launch the different balancing products and we scale the solution. The Netherlands is most advanced. We run a webinar, I think in November last year, for the AFR market in Holland. And there we will be in production in the second quarter, where it's open to every aggregator who would like to play with this. So since there are different products, balancing products, AFR, FCR, MFR, we will have this full swing of products in each of these markets, but this is a step-by-step approach to make that happen. And that maybe to the next slide concludes already, or summarizes the whole deck. This way we believe we have a standard proposition for the market to allow them to participate in this huge value pool, 8 billion plus of balancing markets. The role for the aggregator will be to convince consumers to participate, because the consumer will have to have a little app where he says, okay, you can use my car, you can use my heat pump, and based on that they can participate in the system if they also have their own internet. So they need to have customer consent. They need to have an Internet of Things platform so they can activate and control these devices, and they need to understand how the balancing markets work so they can bid in those markets. I see now in the market a lot of movement. Some parties try to extend their own role, so they are both the marketeer and the IoT platform or the bidder. I also see consortiums starting to arise across Europe. So it's a very active market, but one is for sure, and that is we will move to a much more decentralized energy system where I believe Equigy is now very well positioned as a TSO non-for-profit enabler to make all of that happen, Lucy. So thank you very much for your attention. I think this is in 15 minutes, a very short presentation. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Great, thank you very, very much, Rene. I think that was, really interesting. I mean, I think just commenting on the kind of innovation behind the projects, obviously, so something that we focus as well on at Solar Media is the kind of energy transition and how technology is accelerating that. So we do actually have an event coming up in September, which is pretty much dedicated to the technologies and the technology platforms which are helping to increase flexibility of the grids, looking at not just the UK market, which is obviously doing quite a lot, but also looking at the global, particularly the EU markets as well. So one thing as well that kind of came up, so we had an Iberia session yesterday, and one comment that kind of came across quite heavily was the importance of playing on the strengths of interconnection across EU countries, which is obviously exactly what Equigy has done and is doing. So do you see Equigy, the model of Equigy, kind of being able to replicate across to markets, including Iberia, for example? I know you've obviously just recently added Austria as well, which is great. So you're expanding rapidly.
Yes. Iberian markets could also be included. So we also presented our solutions to the Commissioner, Cathy Simpson of Energy in Brussels, and they love it because Equigy is at the sweet spot of energy transition, decarbonization, e-mobility. It's about European collaboration, and is also at the heart of the digital agenda that the Commission has. So we are really at the sweet spot of making this happen. And our ambition is to have every market in Europe connected or as a shareholder. That's the whole joint venture agreement, is the way it has been set up. And that's also in the dialogue. We've decided to run it as a business rather than as a collaboration, because the TSOs have also a tradition of sometimes some lengthy projects and discussions. By running this as a true business, with shareholders and the supervisory boards, we can move faster. So we are now scaling from 2 markets to 5 this year, but most likely we add more markets in 2022, if not before 22.
And remind me when it was launched again?
We announced on the 22nd of April last year, the BV, and then the market knew about it. The intention of the founding fathers was to do this. We launched the company, we incorporated the company on the 1st of December last year.
Nice. So yeah, making a lot of waves already for such a recently launched thing. So we have a question actually around how do you look to educate the average consumer about how the balancing markets actually work?
Yeah, I don't think we should bother the consumer about that, and that is exactly the role of the aggregator. Because a single consumer is also not that much. You need a pool of devices that you have some sort of size of a decent pool of flexibility. Then you have the flex. So I think it's up to the aggregator. That is where the competition will be out there. The aggregator's role is to explain to consumers that if they have an asset like a home battery or a car, and when it's not being used, that it still possesses value. That there's value in the asset when an asset not being used, and that they can unlock that value. And then if the customer gives his consent, they have to have the technology in place to say, okay, what are the timeframes or the periods that I can play with your battery? And of course, there should be opt-out systems, but it should work like a thermostat in your house. That you just set the parameters for your aggregator to play with your flex. And if then the aggregator has aggregated thousands of these consumers, they have serious building blocks that they can bid in the market. So I think it's not up to the aggregator to explain how the balancing market works at all, because the consumer will never want to understand it. And that's the role of the aggregator. So I see the competition at the level of aggregation. I see a lot of new parties moving into this aggregation role. For instance, Tesla is building auto bidder. I see some car manufacturers using their car lease companies to become aggregators. I see startups like Jetlix. I see there's the incumbent energy providers that move into this space. So there will be a lot of competition to move into this space, and also because we're asset agnostic. I don't care if it's a home battery or if it's a solar wind farm that stops serving, or if it's a heat pump. As long as there's aggregated value in the flexibility, then we are happy. But it's back to your questions, really up to, I don't think if an aggregator starts explaining to the consumer how a balancing market works, he will not find a lot of consumers.
Yeah, fair enough. It can be quite complicated, I think. So we've got another question here around metering requirements for the different types of assets. Can you shed any light or comments on those?
Yes, and that's actually, there's a lot of metering devices in those new assets. And this is also a change in legislation that's needed. And it was actually recently in the UK adopted that metering devices behind the meter are also allowed for settlement and services. This is not all over Europe yet, but it's coming. But we believe in cars, in all these new web-based devices, whether it's heat pumps, whether it's home batteries or cars, there's data measurement equipment in there. And using big data solutions, we believe if we can tap into that source of data, that's sufficient for us to validate. Because we will use, when I go back to the circle that I presented earlier, we'll use multiple sources of data to validate if the service has been delivered. But for sure, we want to use the measurement data out of the equipment itself. So in our solution, every device that the aggregator wants to participate on the system will be locked on the blockchain. So it's known at the blockchain, this battery or this car. And by having this interface with the back end of the OEM, the manufacturer of that device, we can verify if they actually deliver the service.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And we have another question around kind of educating consumers, which I'm sure, might be, as you said, the role of the aggregator rather than the platform itself. Do you have to convince them, small consumers that is, that it will not influence their livelihood at all?
Yes, and again, we are purely serious as a wholesale player. So indeed, it's we enable aggregators to take advantage of this value in the market. And the competition should be in the one who is best in explaining this to consumers. And but the pilots, for instance, or the project, it's not a pilot because it's an implementation. The company in the Netherlands, I'm not going to promote a single company because then I'm also discriminating. But he's been very good at explaining this to consumers. I think consumers earn on average 300 to 400 euros per annum. So it's not a lot of money. But if you buy a car and over a lifetime of 5 years, if you make 2,000 euros by just participating in a scheme like this, yeah, it creates value. Yeah, so, but also it creates value. It also supports the energy transition. So consumers can feel good because they actively participate and they make money. And where in the past, I think energy and electricity were a low interest product, who cared about electricity. As soon as parties start investing in solar panels, home batteries, electric vehicles, these are significant investments. And then people start to become a bit more careful about the business case. And if they see there's a way to earn some money on this, they'll be keen to do it. But in some cases, maybe consumers need not to be convinced. I could imagine that maybe if you have lease cars, that your lease plan will force you to participate in a system like this. That you say your company says you will get your company car, but then you have to participate in the system. So there's multiple ways of how I see this value unlocked. But I think the big driver is the 8 billion plus euro. This money is now flowing to the big power plants. And our intention is to let that flow to carbon neutral devices. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of an advantage, like a double-edged sword. So there's so many flexible assets that consumers can get involved with. But again, the education and as a consumer myself, I might feel happy that I'm able to actively participate, as you say, and help with the transition, but then it can also be quite confusing. So I imagine that education is quite important as well.
I think if you buy like a home battery, you spend 15,000 euros on that, or 10,000 euros, maybe 5,000 euros, and moving forward, prices coming down rapidly. I think if someone then puts a proposal next to it, like, hey, if you buy this battery, you can participate in the scheme. It's all education. And we from Equigy, from TSOs, we're not a consumer play. So we will explain this to OEMs, we will explain this to DSOs, to TSOs, seminars like this. But it's the market themselves that has to pick it up and to start driving this solution. And we've seen there's a lot of appetite already. So there's front movers, there's sleepers, but the moving is the market is being shaped up as we speak.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'll just leave it and see if the audience have any other final questions. Oh, we just had one coming in. So how close is your solution to scaling up? What will the challenges be when you move beyond the pilot schemes?
We are scaling. Like in Holland will be production in the second quarter. What I see is that the scaling the real big volumes will kick in. I personally believe in 18 months or 2 years, because the parties that we've now selected or that came to us, like Viessmann and BMW and Daimler and Renault, they first have to experiment with the system, build the ecosystem, get the consumers, start playing with it. But once they get the learnings sorted and they fix it, because even some changes in the cars have to be, as an example, cars have a sleeping mode. If a car is normally parked, it's in sleeping mode. And then if it gets a signal, it cannot start delivering the V2G, the power back. So there's changes in the production process that cars or other devices have to make. I think part of this first 1 or 2 years is getting ready, understanding it, getting the customer propositions right, getting the applications, the IoT platform, the Internet of Things platforms correct. And once it's up and running, then they can scale. So for me, scaling in the first 2 years is about onboarding more aggregators, more TSOs, more projects, and then the volumes will follow automatically after 24 months.
Yeah, I mean, well, as I said at the beginning, it's great to see, obviously, such a huge collaboration of DSOs, TSOs, partners, and whatnot. So my final question for you was just going to be around, it seems quite complicated in terms of, a lot going on behind the scenes. Obviously, when you're talking about, the different technologies coming on board, revenue streams, etc. What's been, in your opinion, the most, I guess, complicated or most difficult barrier to kind of overcome?
I think it's the paradigm shift. It's the people have to perceive that the world is changing now, and that the energy markets will run completely different in 10 years from now than they run today. And that paradigm shift is a challenge for TSOs, for DSOs, for the suppliers. So you need a fast mover, you need the clever people who look through where this change will come, and they will be the winners of tomorrow. And I see a lot of parties just sleeping and don't believing in the change. And because regulation is coming our way, the value is there. So I see all the other technical problems we can solve. That's not the issue. Mm-hmm. It's the belief, it's driving it. But we have already, we've flipped, there's a tipping point at some stage in a project like this. In the beginning, we had to convince everyone and go and beg people, please work with us. But by now, we've passed this tipping point. People come to us now to ask us to, like other TSOs, can we participate? OEMs come to us, or aggregators. So we're in a bit more luxury position than when we started all this 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the change in mindset is very, very clear when you look at projects and collaborations like this. Okay, so I think we are just about out of time. So I just wanted to thank you so much for your presentation. I think, are you happy for the slides to be shared with the audience? Of course,
okay, yeah. And they can also look at the website if they want more extensive material. And I think our contact details are there as well. If people want to follow up on this, and please reach out to us.
Great, sounds good. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you again at future summits. And thanks to the audience for their questions.
Thanks. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.